I totally know how intimidating cooking can be, especially if you're starting from zero. This video is designed for beginners as a primer to get into cooking. If you've ever said, oh man, I just can't cook, or I'm not good at cooking, this video is for you. By the end of it, you're gonna be able to pick up a recipe and jump right into cooking in a way that you've never done before. Anytime you get ready to make a new recipe, give it a read through or a watch through a couple of times so you understand what's going on. If it's well written, you should see prep as the first stage of pretty much anything you cook. I would argue that the majority of cooking is prep work. I think that's one of the main differences between restaurants and us as home cooks. Restaurants spend a ton of time prepping ingredients and prepping ingredients that have to be cooked and turning them into different prepped things. This is just not something we do all that often as home cooks, and I think it's something that we can implement to become better at cooking. For good prep, you need to stay organized, and that's simpler than it sounds. It's often as easy as just knowing what you need to do next and when you can move over to the stove for the actual cooking to take place. There are so many ways to cook something, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to cover every sort of cooking here, but I've got a couple of tips and a couple of things that I think you really need to know. The important thing to understand is heat management and how to apply it. Anything you want to be crunchy is going to need a lot more heat than something you want to be tender. In that same vein, oil helps heat move more quickly across the food's surface, while water can't get past 212 degrees Fahrenheit, so you'll never get any color on something that's boiled or poached. I would say sautéing is the most common term you see nowadays in cooking, and that is just cooking an ingredient over medium-high heat with a touch of cooking oil. The goal is getting a little bit of color on the ingredient without overcooking the interior. When you put something in the pan, you should be able to hear and see the cooking taking place. You shouldn't just throw something into a pan and have it do nothing, especially in the case of sautéing. Both baking and broiling are done in the oven, just at varying temperatures. Baking is usually done anywhere between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Because air is not a great conductor of heat, it usually takes a while to get something fully baked. You can speed up this whole process by using convection, which is pretty much just turning fans on and moving the air around the actual ingredient that's in the oven. This speeds up browning because any cool air is moved away in place of hot air. People usually use roasting to describe this kind of like aggressive browning process in the oven, and so it's kind of a catch-all term for that. Broiling is just using this top element to apply direct heat. It'll actually, in my oven at least, create a flame that is really good at aggressively browning something. It's perfect for that kind of final kiss of color that you want on an ingredient. Melting cheese for nachos, that's like a really good use and gets used pretty much like every day in my house. Braising is currently my favorite way to cook something because you get a ton of flavor from browning with the action of tenderizing taking place. This is the process of cooking something low and slow in just enough liquid to almost cover the ingredients completely. They're not being boiled in the liquid, they're being slowly cooked to break down into something much more exciting. This is best reserved for large chunks of meat with lots of fat. You wouldn't want to braise a chicken breast, but you also wouldn't want to saute a chuck roast. The important thing is recipes should be there to help guide you, but it's good to understand these terms that they're using. Making food taste good is often as simple as making sure it's got enough salt and that it's been cooked properly. It really can be as simple as that a lot of the times. Acidity is one of those things that helps everything taste better, as it keeps things from getting boring and it makes you salivate so you want to eat more of it. It's a really helpful way to keep dishes from becoming really one note. Really what it comes down to is being willing to taste your food and understand what's happening as you go. Recently I was making and testing a birria recipe for this channel, and in one of my tests it turned out really bitter in the end. Like I went to taste the consomme and it was honestly like mouth-burningly bitter. So what I did is I added salt, a little bit of vinegar, some lime, some honey, basically all of those things until it at least got to a point where it was able to be eaten. It wasn't perfect by any means, but by making those little micro adjustments throughout time and tasting as I went, I was able to fix it into a place where it was like pretty manageable. I recommend keeping some condiments around that you can just throw on a dish that you know that you like and may cover up some sour flavors that you're not really enjoying. Besides making a tasty meal, one of your goals while cooking should be to not make anyone sick. One of the best ways to keep from giving your guests diarrhea is by adopting some good hygiene practices. The first is easy. Wash your hands. Wash them before you start, wash them after you touch any like raw chicken or raw beef and you're gonna handle something else. At least so far, I'm pretty sure I've never made anybody sick with my cooking, never given anybody any food poisoning, and I wanna keep it that way, so I adopt a pretty healthy hand washing habit. Maybe too much, honestly. My dad says I wash them too much and I get these like cracks in my hand and my knuckles, especially in the winter, but it's worth it to not give anybody salmonella. Who knows, maybe you don't wash your hands after touching your dirty phone and then immediately go into touching produce. Maybe you use a knife to cut raw chicken and then use that same knife later to cut lettuce for a salad. Be sure to wash any produce that you're gonna eat uncooked, and be sure to store any raw meat, dairy, or eggs away from anything that's gonna be eaten raw. At your fridge, it's really good to adopt a system where your raw foods are at the bottom, anything cooked is above that. That way, if anything happens and some raw juice kind of drips from your chicken in the fridge, it's not gonna drip onto anything that's cooked already. It's a good practice and it's something that you should adopt. The other main thing to be aware of is something that's called the danger zone, which is a range of temperatures between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 140 degrees Fahrenheit where bacteria grows rapidly. You want to move food through this range as quickly as possible, which means cooling food rapidly or heating up food rapidly. It's recommended to not keep food in this danger zone for more than 2 hours, which means I was right every time in college when my roommates left pizza out and ate it the next morning. That really is a good way to accidentally get sick. A good practice is to cool your food off before it goes into the fridge. So let it at least sit on the counter for like a little bit until it's not hot and steamy anymore. You don't want to put anything that's hot into the fridge or it's going to cool down the entire fridge and put you potentially at risk of that danger zone. The other thing is make sure you put your groceries away pretty soon after you get them. You don't want to like have a bunch of stuff sitting out for hours on end before it goes in the fridge. There are a couple of organizational things that you can do to set yourself up for success as well. For one, I like to cook with a clean sink. I like to be able to throw anything in the dishwasher or just wash anything right away after it's done. It also means I can wash my rice without having to move a bunch of crap out of the way. I don't always do it, but it's really nice. If you've got space for it, it's really nice to have a little setup with your pepper, your salt, your oils, anything that you need in arm's distance. The other thing is if you can keep your utensils by the stove as well. That's also really helpful. Not a requirement. Really all I'd say is know where they are. Everyone's space is gonna be different, and that's just a fact. What's really important is to make sure that you know where everything is. That way you don't have to go digging in the back of that one cabinet that you know is just a void for that one lid that you need. If you watch any level of cooking content on social media, you're gonna see a lot of equipment and often fancy equipment thrown around just kind of willy-nilly. It's sort of insane how much money gets blown on cooking equipment itself when really you can get by with a cutting board, a knife that you like, literally just some pans. A few bowls are really nice to have around, the standard utensils like tongs and spoons. And then I always recommend a Dutch oven because it's cheap and they last a crazy long time, and this is pretty much your pot for everything from making sauces to boiling pasta. You can get by with a very, very small amount of cooking equipment. You don't have to go out and blow the bank on like an insane amount of stuff. Equipment should never keep you from getting into the kitchen, so don't worry about it. If you're not super well equipped, go ahead and look at some of the lists that I've got down below and pick up a few cheap things from Amazon. Our pantries are usually defined by food that we probably grew up eating or foods that we just really want to get into cooking. For me, that means I keep around a lot of dried pasta, a lot of, where is it? A lot of canned tomatoes, a lot of canned beans because I love Mexican food and I grew up in Texas. What I would recommend is not going out and buying a ton of products right away because that can get expensive very fast. What I would recommend doing is taking a little bit of time to think through what cuisines you really like and what you want to get into cooking. If you're really into Mexican food, I don't recommend buying a ton of like soy sauce or oyster sauce or things that would be good for Chinese cooking because there's not a ton of overlap there. If you can really kind of dig deep into what you want to get into, it makes shopping for ingredients a lot easier and it makes recipe understanding a lot easier as well. Hopefully this has been enough to get you from the place of not even wanting to start to being ready to at least jump into the kitchen a little bit. If you need recipes that are tailored to be specifically as easy as possible, I've been doing a series for the last like 10 weeks that specifically goes from about as easy as possible to a little bit more challenging and stuff that's gonna push you. So check out the videos in this playlist that I'm sharing right now. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to the amazing people supporting me directly on Patreon through patreon.com/CameronMarty. They get some cool benefits for supporting the channel, and I get to keep the lights on. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.